Hey there, so here I actually have Almanac of Guitar Voice Leading for the year 2000 and beyond by Mick Goodrick, Volume 2. As you can see, this is not a physical copy. I do have Volume 1, which I have covered a few times before. This is Volume 2. There is also another third volume which I have never seen. I usually always try to get a physical copy instead of a PDF like this, but these books are so hard to find. I was lucky to find this. It was up on the website and I printed it out. So before you email me asking me to send you the PDFs, I don't have it. If you search for it, you can probably find a PDF somewhere. I was just lucky to find one, and then it was up on some weird website and then was gone the next day. So I'm gonna explain what this book is about. And all it is actually, it's a continuation or an extension of the first volume. In order for me to explain Volume 2, I need to go back and revisit some of the stuff in here. So we're going to do that. If you are already familiar with this book and you have it and you worked with it and are just curious what Volume 2 is about, you can skip ahead. I'm going to put time codes so you can skip ahead. So I'll go through the books and the method, kind of. So in this video, there's going to be a lot of talking. I usually try to avoid talking and try to play as much as possible, but it's not possible for me to cover these books without talking a lot. And you're going to hear me say the word voice leading a lot. So I'm going to start from where he takes a chord, a 4-part chord, and goes through a cycle and a scale, and then all he does is he changes this chord to different chord structures. And the second book, it gets even more into different chord structures. But it's the same idea as this book, pretty much. He just continues on that idea. So let me explain how this works from the beginning. So there are a couple of things you need to be able to do, a couple of things you need to understand, or you won't be able to work with this book, or you won't get anything out of this video. You need to know what drop voicings are and chord inversions, how to invert 4-part chords. So what he does, he takes a chord, and he moves it through different cycles. So a 4-part chord is like a C major 7. We're gonna play it in drop 2. So that's the first kind of required knowledge if you know what drop voicings are. And luckily I have a video on where I explain drop voicings. So if you don't know what that is, you can watch that video, because you're not gonna understand anything from this video if you don't know what drop voicings are. So that's a drop 2. The C major 7 4-part chord. So he calls this a 4-part chord. C major 7. And then he goes through a cycle, what he calls a cycle, which is basically a consistent bass motion that you can create from the 7 notes of the C major scale. So for example, this could be a cycle. The C major scale. It's taking the 7 notes and playing them in some kind of consistent order, not random. So the first thing you need to be able to do is to play through the harmonized scale using the chord we started on, C major 7. So that is playing that chord through that cycle, but we're not using voice leading. In order to use voice leading, we have to change things. But before you do that, you need to be able to do this. Also interesting to note that we have different chord types. We have a major 7 on the 1st and the 4th degree. We have minor 7 on the 2nd, 3rd and 6th degree. Then we have what we usually think of as a dominant chord on the 5th degree, and the minor 7 flat 5 chord on the 7th degree. So those are 4 different chord types. I think the idea is that you don't want to think necessarily too much about those chords as those chords, but rather as some kind of chord structures that we're later on going to change. So in order to create voice leading, we have to do it this way. Instead of playing them ascending, we're going to play it descending. So C major 7, D minor 7, E minor, F, G7, A minor, B minor 7 flat 5, and back to C major 7. So that was the same chord progression, but I didn't use, this is parallel. All the voices are going in the same direction, right? So if you think of this as the bass, tenor, alto, soprano, you would never write like for a vocal ensemble like that. That's really bad voice leading, or there is no voice leading. So here I'm creating voice leading. So in order to be able to do that, you need to know all the inversions. So the inversions of C major 7, first inversion looked like that. D minor. So I'm not going to go through all the inversions because I'm kind of assuming that you know how to invert chords if you're watching this video. So this is the root position. That's the third inversion of D minor. That's the second inversion of E minor. First inversion of F major 7, and then we're back to root position. Third inversion, second inversion, and first inversion. What we need to focus on here is what is happening in terms of voice leading. So there are two ways you can think about that. He calls it intervallic voice leading and functional voice leading. And in this book there's always these esoteric symbols and arrows and things, and people sometimes email me and asking me, like, wanting me to explain what all this means. So I'm gonna try to explain. I don't even know what all these abbreviations mean, but it's not necessary for me it's not necessary to know all that. I just need to know how to think of the voice leading. So here the root stays, and all the other voices go down one step in the scale. So it's actually an E minor triad going to D minor triad. Now the root is on top, so that's gonna stay. All the other notes go down one step. Now the root is here in the tenor voice, and that stays. Now the root is here in the alto, that's gonna stay. Now the root is here, bass note, and so on. So you want to practice that. You want to be able to hear how all the different voices are moving. So the bass is not moving at all. And soprano. So if you are somebody who is a vocal choir arranger, they do this all the time. It's like, but we guitar players, we're kind of handicapped in that way. We're playing a chord shape and another chord shape. If I go from C to D minor like that, that's actually terrible voice leading, right? Sometimes you want that because that's what the guitar sounds like. But a vocal arranger would never write like that. So it's good for us guitar players to get into the mindset of thinking like that. So that's the whole point of the book. So we kind of develop this ability to be, or this awareness of where all the voices are, which is obviously a more sophisticated way of playing than just playing chord shapes, finger grips. Another thing to maybe consider is that the first inversion of, for example, D minor, is also F6, and B minor 7 flat 5 in first inversion is a D minor 6. So those are the same chords. So it's redundant to do the 6 chords because they're the same thing. They're just 6 chords are just inversions of other chords. So then he'll go through different cycles. So we're not going to do that. I'm just going to do one cycle. I think there are like 6 different cycles. And if you really want to know what those cycles are, there is a Mick Goodrick book, Almanac of Voice Leading, for piano that you can find in print. So then you will have those cycles, if you want to know what those are. I think there are 6 of them, or 7. He starts on cycle 2 for some reason instead of cycle 1. Can't remember what the reasoning is for that, but I'm sure it's in the explanation in the beginning of the book. We're not going to do all those cycles. I'm also not going to do all the different drop. There's like drop 2, drop 4, drop 2 and 4, and even like one with double drop. And then the closed position. So all those chord shapes he'll go through with all the cycles and 3 scales: major, harmonic, and melodic minor. So if you add melodic minor and harmonic minor, you get even more chord types. So melodic minor, you get a minor major 7, and a major 7 sharp 5. And if you add harmonic minor, you also get a diminished chord. So that adds up to 7 different chord types: major 7, minor 7, dominant 7, minor 7 flat 5, minor major 7, major 7 sharp 5, and diminished. It's funny how it's always the number 7. Playing all those. Also, I stopped. There, you could keep going, right? Imagine doing that with all those scales and all those different drop voicings in every key. And we're just on the first chapter. Actually, it's the second chapter, because the first chapter is on triads. I'm skipping that right now. In all those keys, and also I'm just using the middle set of strings here. You should obviously do it on this set of strings too, like the top 4 strings. Also, I always recommend doing it on the bottom strings, because you get these really nice chords down here. I hear players like Gilad and Lagerlund, they play these chords all the time on the bottom set of strings. That's a really nice chord. C major 7, second inversion on the bottom set, drop 2 on the bottom set of strings, the lowest set of strings. So that's a lot of work. Now, what happens after that is what you're wondering. Well, so remember this chord structure, he called it a 4-part chord. All he does then is to change a note. So the top note, if you drop it to C major 7, you get this. And he calls that a triad over a bass note, because it's a triad, G triad over a bass note, C. But don't get too caught up in the idea of triad over bass note, because it's just it's just a name. Because we're gonna invert this chord, and it's not gonna be a triad over a bass note anymore. But it's derived from a triad over a bass note. So it's just a name for a chord structure. That's how you should think of it. So now we need to be able to go up the diatonic scale from this chord, harmonized scale. So it's G over C, but we're thinking of it as a C chord, but it's G over C. A minor over D, but it's some kind of D chord, right? B diminished over E, C over F, D minor over G, E minor over A, and F over B. That's a really nice one. And it's G over C. Again, we're ending up with 2 chord structures like this, here and here, and 3 look like that, and then 2 that are weird, like this one and this one, F over B. So this chord is nice because it could be many things. It could be diminished, it could be altered. Then the inversions is going to be really interesting. So if I play the first inversion and drop the E to a G to a D, it's this. So this is some kind of C chord. And the next one, you might want to play it like that if it's too much of a stretch for you. And the last one. This is some kind of C major chord, you know, it is in theory it's a C major 7, but it doesn't sound like it, depending on what's happening. If you're copying, you know, a vocalist and you're playing, it's gonna be like, what? But if you're playing open and there's a bass player and, you know, then yeah, the 9th on the bottom, but it's a little bit weird. But notice how it doesn't sound as, that sounds very obvious, right? Like we all recognize that sound, but this, it's more open, it's different, right? So I'm not gonna go through all the inversions of these chords because first off, if you never play those inversions, you should stop the video here and work on that, because you're not gonna be able to go through the cycle with all the inversions if you haven't worked on those inversions. So you need to be able to invert all those chords I just showed you and play them through the harmonized scale. But if we play the same cycle as before, cycle 2, starting here, it's gonna sound like this. So that's a G over C. That's A minor over D, but I'm not playing the lowest note. The D is not the lowest note, right? It's the top note. So it's an A minor triad there. And the D is on the top. That's why it's a little bit confusing, but it's still derived from that. It's just an inversion. So G over C, A minor over D, B diminished over E, C over F, D minor over G, E minor over A, F over B, and G over C. So the triad is actually here, right? Is here. So notice how it's not at all as obvious as before. So now the voice leading is really interesting. So now we have a very different voice leading situation. The root stays. I'm gonna do it down here. And the 9th. And the 7th go down a step, which is the alto in this case. But the 5th, which is the tenor here, goes down a third. So that's how you should be thinking about it, right? And the more you do that, you become aware of the voice leading. So after a while, you're not even thinking about what chord you're playing. You're just thinking about each voice and how it's moving. There's another way you can think of it called functional voice leading, which is that the root becomes the 7th on the next chord. The 5th becomes the 2nd on the next chord. The 7th becomes the 5th. And the 9th becomes the root of the next chord. So intervallic voice leading, how the voices are moving, functional voice leading, what the next chord becomes in what the note of the previous chord becomes in the next chord. Confusing? There are a few other applications for this practicing that I will touch upon later on in this video. Moving on to the next chord type, we're still in the first volume. It calls that triad over bass note 2. So now we're changing, like before, the E to a D. We're also going to drop the G to an F. So that gives us a B diminished triad over C. Okay, so move that up the scale. C triad over D, D minor over E, E minor over F, again, we're getting some different chord structures here. For example, we have this one, which looks like an 11 chord, right? So G over F over G, G over A, in 3 places. Then we get this one in 2 places, A minor over B, and D minor over E. Then we get the diminished over C, and E minor over F. So again, there's 3 types of one, 2 of another, and then there's one and another one that are by themselves. Some of you have played through the inversions of this, but I'm gonna guess that a lot of you haven't never looked at the inversions of this. Most people, they do the first chapters in the book. And by the way, it starts with triads, so I'm just skipping that. But I have made a video in the past where I go over the triads that you can watch if you want. So these inversions are gonna be kind of weird. The first inversion of C, like that, is gonna be. So it doesn't have anything to do with a C major anymore. That's the thing, right? We're not really thinking like that. We're thinking again about the voice leading. And then we have this. So let me play through the cycle of those chords. Same cycle. So this is B dim over B diminished over C. And then this one, C over D, it doesn't really sound like a C major to my ears, but it's a nice voicing. So it's nice to think about these chord shapes and how they can work in different contexts. So now the voice leading is it's the chord tone stays and the 9th stays. The 7th go down to 3rd. And this 4th go down to 2nd. So bass, and then bass, 9th. This is the alto. And the 4 go down to that note. So for me, I really have to think when I'm doing this, but that's the whole idea. So imagine doing this in every key with all the different drop chords and in melodic minor and harmonic minor as well. It's gonna take you quite a while, and we're still on the first book. So a lot of people ask, what's in the second book? But most people don't even get through the first book, so then why would you need a second book? But now we're gonna get to the second book. So that starts with triads, but like fourths. So So I'm skipping that. We're looking at 4-part fourths. So in the previous book we had triadic harmony. It was all those chords, there was a triad somewhere in there. Now we're going to look at fourths. So if I take the C major 7 and drop the G to an F, I get this chord, which is a stack of fourths. Right, we all play this probably. You go up. So this is chordal harmony, whereas before it was triadic harmony. Again, we're getting 3 structures like that. Actually 4. Then we get one that looks like that, one that looks like that, and one that looks like that. So it's a little bit different. And then you have to play the inversions of those. If you move that up, you get really nice chords. So I took the third inversion of a C major 7 fourth voicing. So it's a C major 7, but the G is dropped to an F. And I move that up on the top set of strings. Super great sound for modal playing. So now we're getting into more modal playing with these voicings. So let me play that through this cycle, the same cycle. Remember, there are many other cycles, we're just looking at one. So now the root stays and the fourth stays, the seventh goes down a third. And the third goes down a second. So let me show you how I practice this. I'll take a drone, so it could be, I don't know, let's do E Lydian. Why not? This is an app called Tampura Droid. Tampura Droid. So then I'll take these chords in E Lydian, which is B major, so that's one way you can practice. You can come up with, this could be coming up with ideas for tunes, composition. And you come up with different ways of playing chords that you've never played before. All these inversions you might never, it's like you're exploring new chords and chord structures, but above all, you're developing an ability to think of voice leading. Then there's another chord structure in this book, but I'm gonna save that for a bonus video for my patrons because I want to give something back. I have more Patreons that how do you say that, patrons on Patreon than I was aiming for, so I'm super happy for that, and which enables me to keep making these videos. So that's pretty awesome, and I feel like I should give something back, so I'm gonna make a bonus video where I go through the last chord structure in the book. Also, I think I have an idea of what's in the third volume, because you can actually find the description in on Amazon, or not Amazon, I think it's on that site, what is it called, reverb.com. You can find the description there. So I think I have an idea of what's in the third volume, so I'll talk about that in the bonus video as well. Okay, so before I leave you, there is another way you can practice this stuff, and that is practicing as lines. Somebody commented on my video and talked about if I have looked at this as lines, and I was just doing that actually. So then we need to go back to the closed voicings. So that's C major 7. Let's go back to C major 7. Let's go back to the first chord we did, the 4-part chord. You know, you can play those are all the same, like that's again parallel. Let's apply this cycle, so I'm gonna go down. So D minor, third inversion, right? C major, D minor, E minor, F major 7. That's Stranger Things, right? G7, A minor, and B minor 7 5 5. Back to C. Could keep going. A, F, G, A minor, B minor 7 5 5, C, D, E, F, and so on. Then I'm running out of register. Or you could go maybe all down. Or up. What if I go do the one where I drop the third, the third to a second? That's a tune, a classical tune. Is it Debussy or was it? Do you know what that is? It sounds familiar to me, but if you know what this is, let me know in the comments. D minor, and then F, E minor, with the third is dropped to a second, right? And then F, G7, A minor. There it is again, the same. And B minor 7 5 5 with the D drop to C. And then. So there's the same thing I did before, I just dropped the third to a second. let's do that again over the drone. So this is starting on B, because B major is the same as E Lydian, right? I like that sound. So it's not so much that I'm gonna play these like super fast, like licks like that. It's more that I'm actually really have to think. Notice how I really have to think about what I'm doing. And anytime you're practicing and you forces you to think about what is the next chord, what's the next, you have to think every interval is important, right? Like you need to know every voice, and that's what we're aiming for. So instead of just learning a chord shape, we have to think of every voice is as important. Imagine you're writing for a 4-part vocal harmony group or a string quartet. You don't want to give the tenor voice like a really lame part. You want everything to be interesting. You want every voice should tell its own story. So that's what we're aiming for. If we can do that when we're playing, and I notice when I listen to Gilad Hexman and those Lagerlund and all those guys, they're totally doing that. They're not playing chord shapes really. They're thinking about the voice leading a lot, and so we need to be able to do that too. So yeah, that was a lot of information. I hope you find it useful. So if you're still watching, thank you so much for your time and attention, and I shall see you next time.